Merry Christmas. I know it's not Christmas yet, but it's December, and every December I try to do a whole month's worth of Christmas-related videos, and this month leading up to Christmas, I'm going to be talking about 3 different versions of one of my favorite Christmas stories. Mickey's A Christmas Carol. Now, Mickey's A Christmas Carol is a 26-minute animated short, stars Mickey, Donald, Goofy, and a grab bag of other Disney characters that I'm sure you'll recognize. And this short was my introduction into the story of A Christmas Carol. I didn't really know what A Christmas Carol was before I watched this movie, and I don't really remember the first time I watched it, but I just watched it again recently, and this short surprisingly holds up, not just as a Disney short, but as a legitimate adaptation of the Dickens classic. Because like I said in my intro, this is my favorite Christmas story aside from the actual birth of Christ story. I think that one has to be my favorite. As far as fictional Christmas stories go, this is probably my favorite. And I try to get around to reading the book every year around Christmas time. Just gets me right in that holiday mood. And I love seeing all the different versions, the stuff that they keep, the stuff that they change is always interesting to me. And for me, there is no one version of A Christmas Carol that gets it 100% right like the book. There are some that hit the mark closer than others. One of my favorites being the George C. Scott version, which I've already done a review of. But the Mickey version is an interesting case because it is so short. Because of the condensed runtime, they only have about 5 minutes for each ghost, which means they only have one subject to focus on for each time period, which is a really difficult choice to make because there's so many different iconic moments from A Christmas Carol. So to have only one thing for each ghost to focus on, that's a really tall order. You get the whole story across in under 30 minutes. I'm happy to say that not only does this version do a phenomenal job in the editing process, choosing what to focus on and when, this adaptation is incredibly charming and likable because of the cast of characters that they've chosen to fit these different roles. Obviously, you have Scrooge McDuck as Ebenezer Scrooge, which there was never a doubt in my mind that that's who they would cast because Scrooge is literally his name and it's just perfect casting. And then his nephew Fred, of course, played by Donald Duck, because again, if you watch DuckTales or read the Scrooge McDuck comics, you know that Donald's his nephew. So again, perfect casting. You have Mickey as Bob Cratchit, who's this wide-eyed optimist, the one that nobody can ever get down, so of course that would be Mickey. But what I do appreciate about Mickey as Bob Cratchit is that they weren't afraid to make Mickey a little bit sad, which one of the big criticisms that Mickey Mouse as a character has gotten over the years is that he's too bland. He's too much of an icon. They don't get much depth of feeling or character flaws out of Mickey because he's become too big. He's become the brand of the Disney empire. So yeah, how can you really turn that into a character? But this version does give Mickey some really touching moments and a bit of a character. Probably because he's playing the role of Bob Cratchit. He's not Mickey just being Mickey. But the two personalities are so similar that you can't help but see them overlap. And the best example of this is towards the end of the short when they're in the Ghost of Christmas Future section. And the one thing that they choose to focus on is the Cratchit family grieving the loss of Tiny Tim. And to have a shot where Mickey is cradling Tiny Tim's crutch and a single tear drips down his face, that is an incredibly powerful and somber image to be associated with Mickey Mouse. How many times can you really say you've seen Mickey Mouse cry? Not many, but this movie wasn't afraid to let that moment sink in and hit as hard as it does. But any Christmas Carol adaptation wouldn't feel right unless we had our ghosts. And the characters that they brought in to play these ghosts are also pretty perfect, pretty spot on. The ghost of Jacob Marley is Goofy, and even though his voice sounds a little weird in this version, I don't really know who they got to voice Goofy in this version, but for me, it doesn't sound like the iconic Goofy voice. It sounds a little bit weird, but Goofy is still a great Jacob Marley. He's rattling his chains around the house, and he's got his classic Goofyisms. He's very clumsy with the chains. He's tripping over himself. He's doing little gags, and so that's fun. It does help to lighten up what on paper is a very spooky and, I guess, literally haunting scene where Scrooge is face to face with his dead partner. And the animation on Scrooge McDuck is perfect because it is completely in character with Scrooge as he's terrified of the ghost of Jacob Marley, but we laugh because it's Goofy, and Goofy just is not that intimidating a presence, which I guess would be an issue if this were a more traditional telling of A Christmas Carol, but it's the Disney version, and the jokes are funny, so I do kind of give it a pass. But after Jacob departs, we're greeted right away with a Ghost of Christmas Past played by Jiminy Cricket. And this is admittedly one of the more random choices of casting in this movie. I guess you could really have the Ghost of Christmas Past be anybody, but I like the fact that it's the conscience from Pinocchio. I've always been a fan of Jiminy Cricket from the original Pinocchio. I think his characterization in that movie is by far the best version of Jiminy Cricket we've ever seen. He's not this happy-go-lucky guy that just hops around and sings and dances. He actually had some pretty blunt and sarcastic lines to give to Pinocchio in that version, and you see that come across in this version too. There's some lines that he delivers to Scrooge about his past, the mistakes he's made, and they're pretty harsh, especially for something that's so toned down and lighthearted as the Mickey's Christmas Carol. Jiminy Cricket's got some good one-liners. And then we're on to the Ghost of Christmas Present, who's always been depicted as this jolly green giant. So who better to cast than the giant from Mickey and the Beanstalk? And while he doesn't transform into anything in this version, he does capture the joy and overall warmth that the Ghost of Christmas Present brings in any version. It does fit, and the jokes that they have with his size and just picking up roofs and looking for people and turning a lamppost into a flashlight, those are all great visual gags. And you can tell that these animators were working overtime to throw in as much character, personality, jokes, to fill literally every frame of animation in this special. There is no wasted time here. Every second of screen time, there is something happening in the background or something happening with a character that is a reference to a classic Disney something. All the while, you're not losing a minute of the actual narrative weight that you're following Scrooge along for. And this all comes ahead, of course, during the Ghost of Christmas Future or Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come scene, where I already talked about the death of Tiny Tim, but then it really heats up literally when you see these weasels, who I'm pretty sure are from the Wind in the Willows section of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. They leave this grave open and Scrooge wants to know whose grave it is, and you of course know that it's his, and that's when it's revealed who the Ghost of Christmas Future is. He flips off his hood and it's Pete. Now personally, I always thought it would have been funnier if when he flipped off his hood it was a cute and cuddly character, not in the least bit threatening like Thumper or Winnie the Pooh or Tigger. But having Pete be there is kind of the obvious choice because they're going for a more serious take on the Ghost of Christmas Future. They're not really doing any jokes or gags in this scene. It's actually quite dark because you see the coffin open up, welcoming Scrooge in. He falls in, he's holding on by a twig, and flames are shooting up, trying to engulf him. It looks like he's about to be dragged into hell itself, which does show that even though this short has been pretty light and bouncy up until this point, it's not afraid to really go to some of the darker places that the book goes and other versions go all the time, because A Christmas Carol is not a very kid-friendly story. It's actually pretty spooky and ominous and dark and mature for a classic Christmas tale that we tell every year around the holiday. And I gotta give credit to Disney that they did not water down the sheer terror on Scrooge's face, the terror of the circumstance that actually scares him into changing his ways. And of course he wakes up, he's back in his bed, it's the next morning, it's Christmas Day, and then he goes out and he's a changed man, or he's so happy, and that's when all the classic Disney jokes and physical comedy happens, and it's great. And you see the classic wrap up with him and the Cratchits and everything, and it's just so warm and happy and uplifting that even though someone who was so cold and unfeeling in the beginning of the story could be this wealth of generosity at the end of the story. That's why I've always loved A Christmas Carol. It's the story of a changed man who's learned the error of his ways, wants to help his fellow man be as generous as possible, both in money but also in just love and kindness and these intangibles. And even though this short is a very condensed version of that narrative, it does deliver on all the beats that a good Christmas Carol adaptation should deliver on. You get the personality of Scrooge through and through. You understand the different stages of his life, the different mistakes he's made, all with that classic Disney style of memorable characters that you recognize from other Disney projects, all plopped into this classic Dickens story. I gotta say, as far as different adaptations that have tried to condense the narrative into a 30-minute block and make it more for kids, this one probably handles it the best, not only in condensing the story, but keeping some of the dark moments that actually challenge kids, some of their ideas about selfishness and generosity and life and death even, while at the same time not going too dark where they're gonna run out of the room screaming and crying and shutting down completely. It's a delicate balance to walk, and I think Mickey's Christmas Carol actually did a really good job of that. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about Mickey's A Christmas Carol? Was it your introduction as well into the classic Dickens Dickens tale. Whatever you think, let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby, this is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.